believe. So the NWPA amendments are one attack on the federal environmental assessment system. The other set of attacks were launched on, if I can use that term, it's a bit aggressive, I know, but whatever. The exclusion list and adaptation regulations that were gazetted in March of this year. These were regulations issued under the authority of Minister Prentice as Environment Minister. One set of regulations removes the requirement for federal environmental assessment on an anticipated 2,000 projects under the Building Canada Plan. The other set of regulations, the adaptation regulations, authorize substitution of provincial environmental assessment processes for federal ones for those Building Canada projects that are not excluded under the exclusion list regulations. Last week, Sierra Club, represented by EcoJustice, launched an application under the Federal Court Act, arguing that both these regulations are illegal. And the only one point I wanted to make is with respect to the adaptation regulations, these are the most egregious regs in that they purport to amend the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act itself. And this is the so-called Henry VIII Clause. And we think this is something that this group should be particularly concerned about. They're called the adaptation regulations, but what they do in effect is they amend the Act. I thought that was Parliament's job. Now, the third piece of evidence with respect to the elimination of federal environmental assessment requirements is a proposal that the government has been circulating internally for a replacement statute to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. Now, my information is based on a presentation deck that was given to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency in late January. And the point I want to make to here, there's a huge change is proposed, but the main point I want you to understand is that the bill would, in effect, give the Minister of Environment virtually unfettered discretion to decide whether or not any environmental assessment is required. That is, the minister could basically say, we're not going to have any environmental assessments federally anymore. We're going to basically let the provinces own the resources, let them do the job. Now,
you're doing a great job, and we're all listening carefully, and you seem to be hurrying a bit. Take your time. We're here to listen.
Okay,
and we want to hear what you have to say.
I'm close to.
But don't feel you have to beat the clock or anything.
All right. Well, that. Thank you so much for that. So this document, I have it with me. It's not included with my package, but it's enjoying wide circulation. However, on March the 19th, when Minister Prentice brought forward this package of regulations that I just alluded to, he stated that the proposed bill replacing SIA would be brought forward to Parliament in the next 2 years. So it seems like there's been some backing off from that from that legislative proposal. Who knows where it's at, but certainly it had reached the stage where they were briefing officials in the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency itself as to what was coming, and that briefing was done, as I say, in late January of this year. So there are three pieces of evidence that really point towards the government's desire to really eliminate environmental assessment requirements federally. Why would the government want to do that? Well, I mean, I will speculate just briefly. I think the government's view is that really provincial governments should have exclusive authority for assessing the environmental effects of development projects. And what's the federal government doing? What's the federal government's business in this anyway? And that's a rational position to take, based on one's understanding of of how the federation should work. It does unfortunately ignore the fact that under the Constitution there are certain authorities given to the federal government. The exclusive legislative authority with respect to navigable waters, exclusive legislative authority with respect to fisheries, authority with respect to migratory birds, which is not exclusive, but there's a number of other heads of power. These are federal responsibilities. They cannot be delegated short of a constitutional amendment. Now, to the extent that the federal government has any residual authority with respect to assessing the environmental effects of development projects, it seems to be the view of the government that federal ministers, and by extension the Prime Minister's office, must have complete discretion as to whether or not any environmental assessment is to be conducted. Now, this takes us back really to the early 1980s. We've had environmental rules in place, the Environmental Assessment Review Process Guidelines Ordering Council, which was brought in on when Mr. Cascia was Environment Minister in the Trudeau government. So that goes back some ways, and that was succeeded by the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act in '92. So it takes us back a long ways, and it's Sierra Club Canada. We profoundly disagree with this approach. The human destruction of the life-supporting capacity of the biosphere and the increasing risk of global climate chaos caused by greenhouse gas emissions is the most important issue of the 21st century, in my opinion. That any national government would deliberately throw away key tools to address these critical issues is, in my view, and the view of Sierra Club, irresponsible. Now, I wanted to say that I've had some discussions with Nature Canada about my brief, and they wish to endorse the Sierra Club's view that they are alarmed by this attack on federal environmental assessment law. Now, I wanted to mention I had a few thoughts for the committee in terms of where you go from here. I think in an ideal world, what we would like to see happen, I suppose, is for the government itself to introduce legislation into the House of Commons repealing Sections 5 and 13 of the Navigable Waters Protection Act. I appreciate that's probably unlikely. But nonetheless, it would be great if the Senate committee could recommend that. The other approach would be to bring forward, a bill in the Senate, perhaps a private member's bill, that could seek to repeal these egregious sections of the NWPA. And thirdly, this is perhaps one that you haven't heard before, is that there is a so-called 5-year parliamentary review coming up of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. It's coming up in the next, I think, on the fall, I think it is. And this review is written into the Act. That is, it is required to be done. One thing that this committee could recommend is that the implications of these Navigable Waters Protection Act amendments for federal environmental assessment be included in that 5-year review, so that you could express your concern about what's going on with this bill by saying, Minister Prentice, I think it's the House of Commons committee that would probably get it. But anyway, the parliamentary committee that gets to review the Environmental Assessment Act, we want you to take a good look at what's happening with the NWPA. And that will be one way to, to continue the work on this. So those are all my comments. I know I've probably gone over time, but thank you, Mr. Chair.